Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Nice to see you. Long
Happy.
time no chat, Ryan. Good to see you here.
Yeah, it's been a little while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Come on.
So I'm really excited about what we're doing within our business community. We're going to do member spotlights. And so first up is Brian Southworth. And so what we're going to do today is we were having this conversation in a networking event recently about, the mass exodus of baby boomers that are going to be selling their businesses that are up and running and doing well. We were talking about the folks leaving their corporate careers. We were talking about that's myself included. And then just the massive amount of layoffs, right? And how there are so many businesses out there to be bought and how people just don't know how to do it. They don't know the tools available to them. They don't know the resources. Um, Brian had kind of dropped a bomb in that conversation when we were having it, which led to this conversation about being able to borrow from your 401k to buy a business. And we were all like, whoa, what? And so here we are. The intention for today is to really, look at the process, the transition from employee to business owner, because it is in fact a transition. And what does it look like to buy a business, and what kind of plan should you have in place? Because you most certainly need to have a plan, right? And so we've created some framework around this conversation. And so what we'd like to do, is I just kind of want to interview Brian. I want to learn a little bit about you and your history, how you got into this, and kind of what you do. We'll get into the intricacies of the process, but I'd like you to just kick it off by sharing a little bit about yourself with us.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I'm sorry I was under the weather when we were going to originally do this. You would not have wanted to see me hacking and coughing in season. So, um, anyway, as Jessica said, my name is Brian Southworth. I'm a business broker for Murphy Business Sales. I spent 25 years in cable television and direct broadcast satellite. The first 12 years of that was amazing and fun with Cox Cable. The last 12 or 13 was with Comcast. And while they're a good company, it was not as amazing or fun as the first company. Um, so among the things I did is I led a sales team. I had the wonderful experience of being selected to launch a direct broadcast satellite system here in Spokane in the mid 90s. It was a long time ago in the Spokane market. I had an incredible team that I got to lead. We grew the business to 8,000 customers. And then ultimately, the Department of Justice and Attorney Generals got involved nationwide and thought since we were cable companies, we were a monopoly. And so we sold to DirecTV. Um, for Comcast, I was the commercial sales manager. And my path to leaving corporate America occurred in 2009, late 2009, when I got a phone call from the person I reported to in Auburn, Washington. And she was telling me they were eliminating my team in Spokane and they had a job for me in Seattle. I took one half breath and said, just tell me what the severance package is. My timing was horrendous. I was in my mid 50s and it was the fall of 2009 when theoretically the recession was maybe supposed to be starting to be over. Well, for me, it was just starting. Anyway, so I have some practical experience about transitioning from a corporate career or a career to business ownership, because essentially as a business broker, even though I'm with Murphy, I'm a 1099 and I'm running the show in Spokane. So I hope that all makes sense. And I'm happy to answer any questions as we go throughout this.
And
And
a licensed real estate broker too, right?
right, yeah,
Yeah.
to be a broker, business broker with Murphy, you have to be a licensed real estate broker as well. I only do real estate if there's a business sitting on it that we're selling. If somebody
Right.
comes to me and says, I got a hunk of commercial ground I want to sell, I refer them to some
Yeah.
broker I
One
know.
of the things I really appreciate about you, Brian, is you do a good job of building strategic business partnerships in your community. So you're really plugged in to like what's going on with the commercial brokers and kind of on that, on that inner loop where you have that information and you do a good job of maintaining those relationships, which I think is very important for someone in your role.
Thank you. Yep. We put a fair amount of effort into that. And the reason
Yes.
I say we, as you hear me say we, I know there's nobody sitting beside me, but part of the reason I selected to go with Murphy is we've got 240 brokers and offices throughout the US and Canada, and we all work together and we share our experiences. So,
Yeah, which is so valuable. So let's talk a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing, right? The path from career to business ownership.
okay.
Um, so what are some of the reasons that you're seeing professionals leave their careers and transition?
Right. So sometimes it's burnout. Sometimes they, kind of a situation like me where somebody wanted me to move someplace. I love Seattle. Theoretically, I would have been happy to move there if they would have told me they were going to put me in an office in downtown Seattle and not move me. But I had a bunch of friends that worked for the company who had a similar thing happen, and they moved to the Puget market, bought a house close to the office they were assigned to, and within a year were moved to some other portion of the Puget market. So if you're 30 miles north of Seattle or 30 miles south of Seattle and they move you somewhere else and you're on I-5 every morning for an hour and a half to get to work,
Right.
that doesn't work. So sometimes it's relocation, sometimes it's downsizing or restructuring, sometimes it's other. And mine was two things. It was I was not going to move to Seattle. It was three. I was really furious that my team was going to get severed, and I couldn't see a way that I could look at myself in the mirror, know that they didn't have a job, and I still did. That was the other part of you leaving. And the third part was other. I was really sick of working for people who couldn't say yes, but they could say no. Um,
Yeah.
Not the least bit entrepreneurial.
When I talk to entrepreneurs, two of the biggest reasons I hear are, they just want to be their own boss, right? It's around that freedom and flexibility of, I know it could be better, it's in that space. For me, burnout had a massive, massive part of it too. So
Right.
let's talk a little bit about the mindset shift.
Okay.
And this was a big one for me, right? I was sharing with Brian before this call that I'm an entrepreneur now, but I was not always an entrepreneur. Like my natural being is company girl, right? Like I like to have a brand to be behind. And so it does really, it grows on you though, and this shift starts to happen. But talk about what an employee that was looking to make that transition should be prepared for.
Okay. Um, I'm going to use Jessica and myself as an example. She did it right. Jessica, you shared with me that you had how many months worth of money in the bank to live on?
I had 2 years of reserves in the bank before
Okay.
I made a departure. And I had that long before for other reasons that I was sharing with Brian that I'll share off camera.
Um, so she did it right. I, on the other hand, did it wrong in the sense that I have two grown sons. Um, they were, one was already in college and one was about to start college. And I'll just candidly tell you, I had $135,000 in my 401k, which is not a ton of money, but that's the money I had. I had pretty much no money in the bank. Um, and when I made the decision, like I said, I took half a breath and said, just tell me what the severance package is, right? Well, and then what I did is I thought, okay, I got to get a job. And I actually did eventually get a job. And after I worked at that place for a while, I finally decided I can't work for somebody. I have to, I have to figure out my own thing. So here's where the money comes in. If you've got money in the bank, 6 months or a year's worth of money in the bank, or if you're really smart like Jessica and had 2 years, you can sleep at night. If you are bootstrapping everything, and I'm not kidding when I say this, you're going to be laying in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, looking at the ceiling saying, oh my God, how am I going to pay for college? How am I going to pay my house off? How am I going to do all that stuff? I mean, I'm lucky I figured it out, right? Um, but the thing about the 401k, and we'll talk about this a bit more later, but if you've got a 401k that's inactive, so in other words, you worked for a company, the 401k is sitting there, but there's not still money going into it. There's a program called Rollover for Business Startup. And if you're under retirement age, that money can be pulled out and you can use it to buy a business, but you have to do it correctly from the start. You can't just pull the money out and have it land in your bank account. There are companies, one of them is called Guidant. There's companies that you engage and they take the money, that they're like the trust that's holding the funds. So it never hits your bank account, so you don't have to pay taxes on it. It's completely legal, and I've sold businesses where the buyer bought the business with the 401k. So they have no debt. They bought a business and have absolutely no debt. It's an amazing program, but again, it has to be done right from the start. The other thing about cash is this. I say this to people all the time because I experienced it. Money for a business is like oxygen for a human. If you don't have money to run your business, you're going to be panicked. And I think everybody knows that's ever been panicked. We do not make smart decisions when we're panicked. Mm-hmm. Or when we're severely irritated, which was what I was when I got the call from my boss in Auburn, Washington. I thought, really, 25 years in the business, you can't get on a plane and fly over here and have a face-to-face conversation with me. But anyway, yeah, so everybody knows this money is really important, right?
Yeah, you got to have a plan. I talk to a lot of people during the day and they don't necessarily have a plan for the road. And so there are resources out there, right? People like you that can help them come up with a plan. Is there anything else you want to share under mindset before we go to the next topic?
Yeah, I would encourage anybody that's thinking about buying a business to buy and read Michael Gerber's E-Myth, because he talks about, if you were working for a business and let's say you were an auto mechanic and that was what you loved to do, and then all of a sudden you buy an auto shop. Well, if you're going to be working on that business instead of in the business, you're not going to be able to spin wrenches anymore like you love to do. You're going to be managing employees, managing cash flows, getting jobs, all that kind of stuff. And it's helpful to know that on the front end, right? Good, because you're going to be it. You're going to be everybody, at least to start with. I tell people, one more thing I tell buyers. I tell all buyers this on the front end. You need to understand, if you buy a business, you're going to find out in short order that you're really happy that our planet was created with 24 hours in a day, because you're going to get to pick whichever half day you want to work, which is 12 hours. And you're probably going to be doing that 7 days for a while until you really get systems in place.
Yeah. Which transitions us into the next thing, right? You can start your own business from scratch, which is what I did. I have two businesses. One of them I did that way, and then one I purchased that was already ready to go. And so talk about the advantages to buying an existing business and some of the things you should be looking for.
Okay. One of the things I did was, there was a business that I tried to start, and I found out in short order all I was going to do was be bleeding cash. When we have jobs and something goes haywire with our IT stuff, we pick up the phone and call the IT person or whatever, if you're working for a big company. So if you buy a business and do your research right on the front end and explore the financials of the business, you buy the business, you already have employees, you already have systems in place, you already have customers, you already have cash flow. So everything's already in place. And you buy the business, and with your corporate experience, or if you're former military or whatever your work experience has been, you're going to bring stuff to the table to help improve that business. And one thing I see all the time, you can tell from looking at me, I'm a baby boomer. A lot of people I work with that are selling their businesses started it from scratch, and they're my age. And they bootstrapped everything to start with, and they've done everything on their own. I had the amazing advantage of working for a wonderful corporation that trained all their employees and wanted to promote from within. So there's a ton of experience and training that I got that a business owner doesn't get unless they go out and they seek out someone like Jessica that can provide them with guidance. I have one friend that owns a business, and he says, no, I didn't go to college, but I paid for training every time I needed it. And it's paid off really well. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't go it alone. I hired a coach right out of the gate, right? I even because that was just totally different world for me.
right.
Okay, I would like to, I'm going to be putting a slide up, and for the folks that are attending live, we're happy to share a copy of this. There is a slide deck for you. So if you're trying to take notes or there's things we're talking about, we're happy to share that with you at the end. All you need to do is email Brian, he'll send it over. And feel free to share your information in the chat too while I'm pulling up the slide. Um, we're gonna move on to the process of buying a business here. All right, Brian, would you talk to us a little bit about this process?
You bet. So what you're seeing here is, let's call this a 50,000 kind of foot overview of what it takes to buy a business. An important thing to know about Murphy is this: if we're representing a seller, we actually have a 24-step process from the first meeting with the seller until the sale closes. So working with a buyer, we're going to help a buyer find a business that they're interested in, and find out what they're looking for. How much money do they have to invest? Where would they like the business to be? Again, what kind of business do they like? What kind of business do they not like? It's really helpful to know what a buyer really wants.
Mhm.
How much money they have to invest.
I have a question for you right there, Brian.
Uh-huh.
You find that people aren't even really clear on what it is that they want.
Yes. And
Okay, yeah. That's a tip, you guys. If you're watching, start really thinking about what it is that you want. Because when I talk to folks and Brian talks to folks, people are so disconnected from the experience of living life anymore that they don't even know what it is that they want.
right. And it's a huge red flag when I'm talking to a buyer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jessica, what'd you say?
No, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, it's a huge red flag if somebody can't clearly define what they're looking for. And if they say to me, just show me everything you have, I don't
Mhm.
say this to them, but I know they're never going to buy anything. I'm going to use my children as an example. I love them both dearly, but when I used to take them school shopping, my youngest son shops like me. I can walk in, and within 12 seconds, I know whether the store has what I want or not, at least if I
Mm.
go to the department where I'm at. My oldest son likes to look at everything, and he would get overwhelmed. Like, we're buying shoes. There's not 50 pair, but probably 12 pairs of shoes out there. He's never going to make a decision. The same thing with somebody that's saying they want to buy a business. They're saying they want to, but all they're doing is they think it would be cool, right? If
Yeah.
somebody can clearly tell me what they want, then I get a chance of finding it for them, right?
Yeah.
So that's really helpful. And do they have enough money? Um, and do they have enough money after they buy the business to have working capital? What's their credit score like? All that kind of stuff. When we finally find a business that they're interested in and they've reviewed, we always put together a big confidential information memorandum on any of our listings that's everything about the business. The purpose of that document is having it be like the potential buyer, visited the site without actually going there. You've reviewed the confidential information memorandum that we've provided. You've asked some really great questions. I've answered what I could. And the buyer starts asking questions where I've got to contact the seller to get the answer. Then we're getting close to the point where it would make sense to set up a buyer, broker, seller meeting. And at those meetings, unlike today where I'm talking a lot because I'm presenting, at a buyer, broker, seller meeting, I have a pad, a paper, and my pen I want the buyer and seller talking to each other, and I'm just taking notes. If somebody asks me a question, I'm going to answer, of course. But a buyer broker seller meeting, then if the buyer's ready to make an offer, they make an offer. We've got an offer document that is approved by this for the state of Washington. And then once the offer is accepted, true due diligence starts. Due diligence is about 30 days where you can ask for any information on the business. You're going to immediately see tax returns, any manuals or systems that are in place, anything. You can ask anything about the business through me, through the broker, and I coordinate getting those answers for the buyer from the seller. That takes about 30 days, and then bank financing can take up to 90 days, and I've seen it take longer than that to get approved. And then finally, we get to closing, and what we want to have occur at closing. In Washington State, the sale of a business has to be closed by a closing attorney. So we're sitting in the closing attorney's office. Here we get the buyer, the seller, myself, the attorney, and what we want is everything to go smoothly. The last thing we want is for somebody to go, oh, well, wait a minute, what about insert anything in there? Closing is going to stop. And the trouble with closing stopping is if we're closing in the middle of the month, all the prorates, everything have already been figured out. So before we go to closing, we make sure everything's in place. And then after closing, if it's a small business, I'm going to use a coffee stand, just a simple business, coffee stand. Let's say you're buying a coffee stand. Seller's probably going to work with you for 2 weeks at no charge to transition you into the business. They're not working for you, so you're not saying to them, come in and work Mary's shift or Joe's shift because they didn't show up. They're talking about actually training you to run the business. If it's a complex business and 2 to 4 weeks isn't enough transition time, then between the buyer and the seller, there'd be some sort of mutually beneficial consulting agreement because nobody's going to work for free, right? And that transition time frame is really important. And one more thing about the buyer broker seller meeting, I have never seen anybody buy a business if the seller be able to buy a business if the seller did not like them, right? Or if the buyer didn't like the seller.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's just way too messy.
Will you briefly go over the common pitfalls and mistakes to avoid?
Yes. And one that I didn't put on my list, Jessica, but I will mention it off the bat. I love the fact that people can find all kinds of information on the internet, right? Sometimes people call me and they think they're going to buy a business and they read something about seller financing, and then in their head, they think seller financing is, oh, I can buy this $750,000 business with nothing down because the seller's going to do seller finance. No, that's probably not going to happen. In fact, it's probably isn't the right word. It's never going to happen. What can happen, sellers sometimes are open to carrying a seller note for maybe 3 years or 5 years. If the buyer's short on working capital or something, I've had deals structured that way. And we can talk more about that in a bit. So that's one pitfall that's not on there. Another one is, and I mentioned this already, not being able to clearly identify the type of business you want or the amount of money you have to put down, or not knowing or having identified how much money do I really need to make when I buy this business. Buying a business without understanding the financials or trying to make an offer on a business without understanding the financials is a huge red flag. In fact, and I won't let people make an offer until they've proven to me that they understand the financials, at least at the level I do. And when we list a business, we don't just look at the tax returns. It's typically 4 years tax returns and P&Ls. We crawl through them to figure everything out. Rushing due diligence is a really bad idea. You have that 30 days is yours to look at everything and say, yep, this looks great, I'm moving forward, or no, I found something I don't like and I don't see any way that this can be made, and I'm walking away. And then getting annoyed at your lender because the the approval process is taking way too long. Or, and I actually had this happen. Loan was approved, SBA 7A loan was approved, everything was ready to roll. All the bank was waiting for was the approval number, and the government shut down. And nobody was doing anything, including transmitting approval numbers. So those are the common pitfalls that I've seen.
And then talk to us about, you've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but why engage a Murphy broker?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that, because I've talked a little bit about this. We help a buyer conduct a search.
Mhm.
When we're listing a business for sale, we start with, after we've signed a client broker confidentiality agreement with the seller, we start with a business valuation. I'm going to ask them for 4 years tax returns and 4 years P&Ls and balance sheets. And I'm going to crawl through their financials, and I'm going to put together the evaluation that illustrates the fair market value of that business. And if they want to list it for substantially more than that number, I'll say, sorry, we're not going to do that. I can guarantee you'll find a broker someplace that'll do it, but it won't be a Murphy broker. So we determine the fair market value of the business. We help a buyer prepare an offer to purchase. We assist in deal structuring. Maybe there's some seller financing, maybe there's 401k, whatever. Assist the buyer through due diligence, and then we get our documentation, the purchase and sale agreement, all that in place for the closing attorney. And then there's going to be additional fees from the closing attorney to draft their documents. It's important to know closing costs are evenly split between the buyer and the seller. For a small transaction, it might be about $1,500 per side. For a large transaction that's really complex, it could be as much as $5,000 or $6,000 per side. What will cause that cost to go up substantially is if we have everything in place for closing, and then the buyer or seller start changing something, because every time an attorney has to draft something, it's billable hours or answer the phone. So there are times when a buyer will call me and ask me to represent them, and it's another broker, it's not a Murphy broker, but another broker that has the business listed. And if the buyer has not talked to that broker, I'll talk to them and see if they're willing to do what's called a cooperative brokerage arrangement, where I'll represent the buyer. The seller's broker obviously will represent them. Seller typically almost always pays the success fee, and then we'll split that fee evenly, right, after the sale.
Yeah.
We will do that. We embrace cooperative brokerage. There are brokers that won't do it. They just won't.
Right.
You
Well,
know?
and it's really important to get an accurate valuation. So I really like that you guys have a process, because people value businesses all the time at different processes. So I really appreciate the process that you have. We only have a couple more minutes here, but what I want you to share is, can you share like a success story or a case study that you have of someone who's kind of gone down this path?
Yeah, you bet. So I have 3 favorites. The first one, it was so cool. It was my son's 30th birthday. I had 2 pizza places listed in Spokane, owned by the same people, and had been in business forever. They were the second owners. So I'm driving to Portland to celebrate my son's 30th birthday with him. And I'm, whatever that freeway is that goes between Richville and Tri-Cities, and my phone rings, and I won't talk while I'm on the driving unless I'm on a freeway, and that's probably even stupid, but like I'm not going to do it in city traffic or anything. But I answer the phone. He tells me his name. He's interested in this listing I have. And so I said, I'm driving. I'm just about ready to pull into the gas station. Let me call you back in 10 minutes. So I call him back. Here's what he was doing. He lived in Dallas, and he managed like 30 or 40 Papa Murphys. He was really sick of the corporate rat race. He was born and raised in Canada. He was sick of the heat, and he wanted to get out of Dallas. And he said, I'm really interested in these restaurants. So I told him a little bit about it. I said, okay, I'll be in Portland in 2 hours or 2.5 hours or whatever. And once I've checked into my hotel room, I'll email you the business buyer's package that we have a buyer fill out before we give them more information on the listing. He did that. I sent it to him. 2 weeks later, he flew up here. We had a buyer broker seller meeting. A couple weeks after that, he made an offer and it was accepted. It took forever to close, and here's why. Washington State had just legalized marijuana. The Liquor Control Board was now the Liquor and Cannabis Control Board. The administrator of that department was furious about that and quit. And so the Liquor Control / Cannabis Control Board was just in a mess. And the buyer had to get a liquor license for both locations to be able to buy the business because the liquor license doesn't transfer. Anyway, eventually it got done. The other one was somebody that's actually a friend of mine that was working for a company. They were downsizing and he found out about a listing I had that was in the construction industry and he bought it. And this is a perfect example of somebody having all the skills and abilities to run their own company because they learn so much working for somebody. And he is a rock star. He's taken that company to absolutely positively the next level, which is what we want to see. And then the last one was a person, she had left her career. She had a 401k and she was able to buy the business using her 401k.
I love it.
When she called me and talked to me about it, I set up a buyer broker seller meeting right away because she knew something about the business. After that meeting, she said, I want to write this up. I want you to write this up tomorrow. I said, okay. She goes, I want you to come to my house to do it. I said, okay, I can do that. What time do you want me there? She said 6 a.m. I said, I'll be there.
I'll be there.
Full price offer.
Tell us, when should an owner prepare to sell?
Yeah, so the reason I included that is because the best time to start working on your exit strategy for your business is the day you start or buy your business, right? The next best time is 3 years before you want to go to market. And if it's somebody that's my age and they really just need to sell now because they're done, we can scramble and we can make that happen.
Yeah. Build a business you can sell tomorrow, but you don't want to.
That's perfect example.
Mhm.
I meet with people and I love it when this happens, even though it sounds like I'm talking myself out of a job. This is a perfect example. I met with a young man, everybody's younger than me. He was probably 40, had a great business and he was working about 30 hours a week and he wanted me to sell his business. And I asked him, I said, what are you going to do after I sell your business? And he goes, I don't know. I'll figure it out. And I said, you know what? I'm sorry, but I'm not going to list your business unless you can tell me what you're going to do after you sell. 2 weeks later, he called me up and said, you're right. I'm not ready to sell. I don't know what I do. So there's nothing wrong with having a business to the point where we don't need to be there.
Yeah.
Thank you for pulling up this slide.
Yeah.
Reasons why owners sell, only 12% plan to sell. Look at the one that's only 2%. I have multiple examples where I got a phone call from somebody and they're selling for those reasons. And it's really, really sad because it's some kind of unpleasant between
it's a whole other conversation, Brian. Just the creating of partnerships and the dissolution and best practices. I'm talking to a client right now that's creating a partnership. And it's like, how can you protect yourself? That's literally a conversation for another day because I know it does happen.
Yep, absolutely.
This is really, really helpful information. Super awesome. Appreciate all of the content that you have provided us in this short period of time. I want to put your slide up here because this is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. If you have questions, you want to talk to someone, you want to bounce an idea off someone, please reach out to Brian to talk about your business or buying a business, right? You do both. You help buyers and sellers. And
right.
I know you're such a resource in the community. Is there any questions that we have right now?
Good morning. Thanks for setting this up, Jessica. Brian, I just had a quick question. When I've been shopping businesses and whatnot, is the rule of thumb still kind of just a broad brush valuation? Is it still kind of 2.5, whatever times EBITDA. Is that still a fair kind of winging it approach? I mean, that's pre due diligence, pre looking at the books to back into that, of course, but just kind of kick it around, rule of thumbs. And then I also wanted to get your take on what you see with SBA financing, with sort of a 6-month vision from you. I know they're kind of different questions, but if you could touch on those in a brief period of time here.
Yeah, you bet. I love both of those questions. Rules of thumb are, they're, let me just say this, they're risky, right? So, but I'm glad you said 2 point whatever times EBITDA, because sometimes people want to tell me it's something based on revenue. And I'll say, look, here's the deal with revenue. You can have two identical companies. Both their revenues is $1 million a year. One of them has a tax return with a positive number at the bottom of the return. The other one has a negative number. So revenue revenue means something, but it doesn't mean what
everything. Right.
When we're doing evaluation, one of the databases we use that costs us a ton of money to have access to, and I'm happy to pay my share, is called peer comps. And we can go in and look at businesses by industry and what they sold for as a multiple of sellers' discretionary earnings, EBITDA, even as a multiple of revenue, how much inventory was included, all that kind of stuff. And the reason we pay to have access to that is the information that's in peer comps is supplied by the banks that did the loans to finance the transaction.
Right.
So, and multiples can really be all over the board, right?
Sure.
Based on the industry. So SBA, here's the beautiful thing about SBA now. Interest rates are starting to creep down. Last year was really tough because, SBA interest rates for a while were kind of in the 6 or 7% range, maybe even a little bit lower. And then all of a sudden, 12%. And there were people, I had people that were in different stages of buying, and they're like, no, we're out. And I knew what would happen. People bury their head in the sand, and then there's some people that are just going to leave their head buried in the sand forever. And then there's other people that finally think, okay, well, I can leave my head buried in the sand, but there's still business going on. There's still, we still had sales going on. It just slowed down from what it had been previously. And we've seen a substantial increase in activity since the first of the year. So I hope
to follow up on this conversation about buying businesses, next month on April 17th, we're going to have an SBA, local lender, Chris Wolf, and we're going to do the same thing on the heels of this conversation, kind of to be continued with financing around this. So mark your calendars. That's going to be a free event to folks at 8 a.m. on April 17th to dive into SBA.
Yeah, and Chris is really good. She's with First Interstate Bank. She's an SBA expert, and they've financed a number of our transactions. So they're
she's really great. Brian, thank you so much for all of the information that you've provided today in such a short period of time. Like I said, drop your information in the chat. Please reach out to Brian and connect with him one-on-one. He's here as a resource. I'm here as a resource. If you're already operating a business and you want to see more profit to prepare it to sell, that's kind of where I come into play. So really appreciate everything you're up to, Brian, and have a great day.
Thank you. You guys too. I appreciate it.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the week.